You can take out that slide.
Okay.
Keep this.
Yeah, that seems fine, sir. It actually seems very interesting. So I am creating the student response sheet and I will include this right away.
It's on YouTube just now.
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
Okay, great. So I'll just mute myself and stop my video, and I'll come back in about 5 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think
Leave the meeting room.
That was buffering, so don't.
no, he won't leave. He'll just
Mute and mute.
And annotation is disabled?
Yes, it is.
Okay, fantastic.
We've done it.
Great. Okay, see you all in a bit then.
And go with Facebook also. I'll check the YouTube right now. I'll check the YouTube. Pallavi, check the YouTube. Video disable करके रखना.
Yes, we are live, ma'am.
Okay, great. Video disable. Okay. How many people are in it? Started video. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of our virtual literature fest, LitQuake. And we have with us today Swati Roy from Bokaro and Mr. Christopher C. Doyle, our speaker for today. So I'm going to hand over the session to Swati ma'am so that she can introduce Christopher sir to all of you. Students, before we begin, a request to all of you, please do not unmute yourselves and do not write on the screens. Swati ma'am, over to you.
Thank you so much, Tasneem ma'am. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's our pleasure to welcome you to LitQuake 2020 Day 2. LitQuake is a virtual literature festival being organized by Purple Stone Publications. This session is being brought to you by Purple Stone in collaboration with Bukuru Children's Literature Festival. My name is Swati, as Tasneem ma'am said. I and my fellow director Venkatesh are here from Bukuru. For the past 17 years, we have been working towards bringing children and books together through sessions such as today's.
Wait, I'm doing it.
In today's session, titled Hidden Secrets, Ancient Mysteries, A Quest for the Truth, our speaker, Christopher Doyle, takes you on a trip deep into ancient history, exploring mysteries from around the world as he reveals secrets of the past. Christopher Doyle is a best-selling author, passionate musician, and proficient corporate executive. His books, the Mahabharata Secret, the Mahabharata Quest series, and the Patala Prophecy series, transport the reader into a fascinating world where ancient legends blend with history and science to create a gripping story. A graduate in economics from St. Stephen's College, Delhi, and postgraduate in business management from IIM Calcutta, Christopher has worked with leading multinational organizations, published articles on business and management, coached CEOs, and continued to create music through his classic rock band called 33 1/3. Today, Christopher will present for about 45 minutes. You may submit your questions through the chat box. All questions from the participants will be answered collectively by the speaker in the last 15 minutes of the session. Please note, mute your mics as Tasneem ma'am said, and try not to move around during the session as that may cause disturbance. Thank you so much for being here on a Sunday morning. Over to you, Christopher.
Thank you, Swati, for that introduction, and good morning to all of you, and welcome to this session. I'm very excited about sharing some of the research that I've been doing for the last so many years. And before I start, I just want to check with all of you, how many of you like mysteries? If you can just type yes into the chat box, so I know how many mystery hunters and people who enjoy mysteries are on there. Just type yes into the chat box. Okay, that's fantastic. I can see a lot of yeses coming in, so that's great. So I'm going to be sharing with you a lot of mysteries that I've come across in the course of my research. And in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take myself off the camera and I'm going to show you some stuff because I want your focus to be on what's on the screen, not on me. So give me a second while I open up the deck, and you all will still be able to hear me. And I will just share my screen and then we can start. Okay, so so we're going to be talking about secrets and mysteries, and I'm going to be taking you deep into the past. We're going to be looking at unexplained mysteries of the past. We're going to be looking at specifically with reference to the Mahabharata, some of the unanswered questions, some of the questions that I've asked myself when I was researching and reading the Mahabharata. Did the events described there actually happen? Is it possible that some of the fantastic weapons described in the Mahabharata, could they have existed? How could people living so many thousands of years ago have had such an advanced level of science and technology? And are there scientific explanations for so many of the fantastic stories and things that we read about in the Mahabharata? Were there giants in the Mahabharata? We read about, you know, these huge, enormous beings, the Rakshasas, the Asuras, the Devas. Were there really giants in those days? And I've actually explored a lot of this in my book. So I started off with the Mahabharata Quest series, and there are 2 books in this series so far. These are thrillers set in today's times, in modern times, but they explore connections between science, history, and the Mahabharata in a fictional form. But there's a lot of fact that's in this, and I'm going to share some of those facts with you today. I also came out in 2018 with a series called the Patala Prophecy series. There are again 2 books in this series as well. And actually, the 2 heroes of this this series are actually 2 15-year-old school children who study in Delhi. And again, this is a fantasy thriller series set in modern times, a hidden world of swords and mantras. And all of this is based on the research that I do. So I'm going to be sharing with you facts, though I write a lot of fiction. And you will hear a lot about the Mahabharata today, but not in the way that you usually hear about it. So let's dive straight into it. But before I start, I want to take you back to 1868 in Paris. February 1868, a caretaker of rooms entered a room that he was looking after, and it was a small, squalid, dark room with only a bed, a small table, a coal gas stove, and a corpse, a dead body. The body was blue, the skin had turned blue, and there was a dried froth of blood upon the lips, which showed that the stove was the cause of the death. And the body was that of a 29-year-old man called Abel Barbin. Now, there was an investigation, and it was concluded that he had committed suicide, and it was a suicide. But when the autopsy was done and the medical examiners examined the body, it it was clear that the death of Abel Barbin was not just because of his poverty and loneliness. He was poor, he was lonely, but it was also the result of an error that had occurred 30 years before. And this error was a mutation that caused a single enzyme within Abel Barbier's body to fail critically somewhere around April 1838, 7 months before he was born. And we know this as a result of the medical investigation. We know this because we know when the future Abel Barber, the man who died, when he was first held by his mother, it was not a son that she held, but a baby girl. That's right. She held a baby girl when Abel Barber was born. But I just said he was a man, a 29-year-old man. So I'm going to come back to this story, and it's a very interesting story, but let's dive straight into the past first. And I'm going to take you, to start with, I'm going to take you to Egypt. And this is the Great Pyramid, which is 457 feet in height. It's huge. It's the height of almost a 50-story skyscraper, 45 to 50 stories high. We are told it was built by a pharaoh called Khufu in approximately 2550 BC. And we also told it was built as a tomb for himself. Now, the original entrance to the Great Pyramid was hidden for a very long time. This is the original entrance. And if you look very closely, you can see that you cannot get in through this entrance. It's blocked. Even today, these huge blocks are covering the entrance. And in uh, in about 1820, the Caliph Al-Mamun, Abdullah Al-Mamun, he decided he wanted to go inside. And because there was no entrance, he created an entrance. He created this tunnel. And this is the same tunnel. If you go as a tourist to Egypt today, you enter the Great Pyramid using this very tunnel. Now, coincidentally, luckily for Al-Mamun, the tunnel he created, which is at the bottom of the picture, was in line with the entrance. He didn't know it. We know it now, but it was actually in line. So he actually managed to hit one of the passageways of the Great Pyramid. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. But this is the tunnel that Al-Mamun created. Now, when Al-Mamun entered the pyramid, he expected to find a lot of treasure, the body of the pharaoh Khufu, and a lot of inscriptions on the walls, because all Egyptian tombs, especially kings, they have a lot of gold, silver, jewels. They have writing on the wall. They've got, and the body of the pharaoh is normally there. But Al-Mamun was in for a shock, because when he entered the Great Pyramid, it was empty. There was no one had ever been buried in there. And instead, we now know that the Great Pyramid has this very mysterious set of passages and chambers. You can see there's an underground chamber down here. There's what's called the Queen's Chamber here. And then off to the left and up above it is the King's Chamber. And I'm going to talk a little bit about these. And look at these passages. And this is a better picture. You can see these passages. They are all very sharply angled. You see these angles? These are very sharp angles. And I'll show you how easy or difficult it is to climb through these in just a minute. Let's start with the Grand Gallery. This is the Grand Gallery, which is circled on the screen. And I'm going to show you a photograph of this now. This is what it looks like. And today, of course, you can see there are handrails, and there are these wooden, there's a wooden ramp to help you to climb, help tourists to climb it. But this is a photograph from the 1920s when they were exploring the Great Pyramid. And you can see how difficult it would be to climb these without the handrails at the side and the wooden ramp. And it makes you wonder why. And this is the passage, this is the Grand Gallery, as I showed you, leads to the King's Chamber over here. Now, let's look at another part of the Great Pyramid, which is the antechamber. So it's circled over here. It's a small chamber in front of the king's chamber. So you come through the grand gallery, go through the antechamber to enter the king's chamber. And this drawing from the same book, this is from a book written in the 1920s by the Edgar brothers. You can see over here, this is the antechamber. And you can see how you have to, the grand gallery is tall, it's huge, it's got height. And then you have to bend and enter this antechamber. And then again, you have to crawl through this tunnel to get into the king's chamber. It's very weird. If you built this to put a pharaoh's body in there, why would you do this, right? And you look at this little tunnel at the right side of the photograph. That is the entrance to this chamber. This is the king's chamber. This man is standing inside the king's chamber. And you can see this little hole in the wall over here. This is also a tunnel. And in fact, you can see this, what they call this air channel on the top from the king's chamber on the right-hand side. That is what you just saw, the small little hole. Okay, let's look at another one. This, where I've circled over here, you can see this is the entrance. It's just below the grand gallery, actually, the small passageway. And this is what it looks like. So above this man's head is the grand gallery. And below this hole over here is a tunnel that leads to the queen's chamber. And again, you can see from the height of this man that you cannot walk through it. You can only crawl through it. So to get into any of the chambers, you have to crawl through these tunnels. Why? Here's another thing which I bet you guys didn't know. This photograph was taken, I think, again in the 1920s or 1930s. And over here, you can see a very curious phenomenon which people don't normally talk about. And that is, if you look at this photograph here, this is the Great Pyramid. The other one is the pyramid of Khafre, the second pyramid. And you can see that the Great Pyramid over here, you can actually see, can you see this line down this side? It's reflecting the sun. Every side of the Great Pyramid actually has two sides to it. It's 8-sided, not 4-sided, because there's an angle over here, which you can see very clearly in this photograph. And if you look at this color photograph, which is more recent, can you see this line going down the wall of this Great Pyramid? It is angled, and very few people know this fact. It was only discovered when that photograph, the first black and white photograph, was taken from a plane. Who built this, and why did they build it? Why did they hide the doorway, the entrance, and leave it locked up for such a long time? We don't know. But let's go to another monument close by. The Great Sphinx. It's huge. It's 240 feet in length and 66 feet high, which means it's the height of almost a 7-story building. And for most of its existence, the Sphinx has been like this, buried in sand up to its shoulders, just the head and the neck sticking out. In 1990, Dr. Robert Schoch was called to Egypt to investigate the Sphinx because archaeologists have always believed that the Sphinx was built by Khufu's son Khafre in approximately 2500 BC, and the face of the Sphinx is supposed to be the face of Khafre. But there's no real proof. There's no scientific evidence that this was built in 2500 BC. It was built by Khafre. So Dr. Robert Schoch is a geologist. He's a scientist. He is a professor of geology at Boston University. He's a PhD, and he specializes in the erosion of rocks. So he was called in to investigate, and he did a lot of tests on the Sphinx, and he came up with a very interesting conclusion in 1992. Can you see these lines lines on the body of the Sphinx? These are lines of erosion, right? And they're very different from the face. If you look at the erosion on the face, it's quite different from the body, right? The face is much smoother because the face has been eroded by wind. And if you look at the walls around the Sphinx, can you see there are massive lines of erosion here as well? And here's a close-up. You can see all these lines. So Dr. Robert Schoch said that his scientific tests told him that these lines of erosion on the body of the Sphinx and the walls surrounding the Sphinx were caused by heavy rainfall, not wind-blown sand, unlike the face of the Sphinx. It was heavy rainfall. And this was a problem because in 2500 BC, it was not raining heavily in Egypt. It was dry as it is today. In fact, the last time it has rained really heavily in Egypt was in a period called the Neolithic Subpluvial, which was the 3,000-year period between 8,000 and 5,000 BC. So Dr. Robert Schoch was really saying that the Sphinx had to be at least 9,000 years old. It had to be built in at least in 7000 BC in order for the rainfall erosion to happen. But if Khafre did not build the Sphinx in 2500 BC and someone else did, 9,000 years ago, who was that someone? How were they able to build a monument like this? Okay, another mystery in Britain, Stonehenge. It's an amazing monument, but there are lots of things you don't learn about as a tourist. I went many years ago as a tourist and I never knew the secrets. In 2015, I spent a week in Stonehenge with two archaeologists, and they told me a lot of very interesting things about Stonehenge. So there are a lot of mysteries about Stonehenge. Who built it? Why was it built? Because it's aligned to the sun. It's astronomically aligned. It's a very, very accurate astronomical calendar, and no one knows why it was built. But for me, the mystery of Stonehenge is not why or who built it, but how it was built. Because this is what the archaeologists explained to me, that if you look at the standing stones over here, now each of these stones, standing as well as the ones on top, each of them weighs approximately 70 tons. Heavy, really heavy. So the standing stones have these two projections. Can you see them over here? They're called tenons. And corresponding to them are these sockets called mortise holes. And this joint is called a mortise tenon joint, something like a Lego set. It fits together like a Lego set to lock the stones in place. Not only that, the side of the stones on top have this joint. Can you see this? It's called a tongue and groove joint. Why? It's pretty obvious, right? It looks like a tongue going into a groove. And it's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle to lock the stones from the side. So the builders of Stonehenge had built two locks to ensure that the stones didn't fall off. Very clever. But how did they do it? Because remember, the standing stones are about 25 to 30 feet high. They're tall stones. So they had to lift a 70-ton stone 30 feet into the air. So you have had 100 men pulling with ropes, lifting into the air, not being able to see what they're doing because you can't see what's happening on top, right? 30 feet in the air. And they would somehow manage to fit the stone in place because remember, the mortise tenon has to lock in place. Now comes the real mystery. Once you put one stone, the left stone in place, the right hand stone has to be placed in such a manner that not only the mortise and tenon lock, but the tongue and groove also have to lock. Two locks have to lock simultaneously, and you can't see what you're doing. And you're not playing with small Lego bricks, right? These are 70-ton blocks of stone. It's like trying to assemble a Lego set into a design with your eyes closed. Yet, in 2400 BC, they built Stonehenge. And here are the photographs I took. You can see the mortise sockets, the mortise holes are very clearly over here. This was destroyed by the Romans in approximately 60 to 70 AD. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. But here you can see these upright stones have these tenons. You can see the tenon very clearly in this close-up. And here, if you look very closely, can you see this projection? This is the tongue of a tongue and groove joint. The stone next to it was thrown off. So it's all there, and it's all very mysterious. So who built Stonehenge and how? We don't really know. Okay, Baalbek. Now, I want to draw your attention to this wall. There's a lot of controversy about this wall among archaeologists. Some of them say that this wall was built 2,300 years ago by the Romans. There are others who say this was built much, much before, maybe 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, but they don't say who built it. But for me, it doesn't matter when it was built, and I'll tell you why. Just to give you a comparison of how big this wall is, you can see this person standing over here. Just gives you an idea of the scale. And I want to show you these three stones. If you see these three stones in a row, you can see them a little more clearly over here. Stone 1, stone 2, stone 3. And as a comparison, again, these are two fully grown men in hats who are standing over here in this old photograph. And here you can see the three stones I'm talking about. Now, why am I telling you about these stones? Why am I drawing your attention to this? You can see that these stones are placed on the wall at a height of approximately 20 feet. So they've been lifted into the air and placed on the wall. Each of these stones weighs 840 tons. This is not Stonehenge. Stonehenge is like marbles, small stones compared to these. 840 tons. Now, it doesn't matter whether it was 2000 BC or 10,000 BC, because today in the 21st century, if we want to lift heavy weights like this, we use a crane like this. This is the largest crane in the world with the maximum capacity. And even this crane can lift only up to 825 tons. So with our cranes in the 21st century, we would not be able to put those stones on the wall. Yet someone put them there. How did they do it? And it doesn't matter when. So if you go to the place where the stones came from, the quarry, you still see this huge stone placed here. It is assumed that this stone was not used in the wall because it's got a crack in it, so it wasn't suitable for building. And this stone weighs 1,150 tons. And just next to it, about 4 years ago, another stone was discovered in the ground. You can see it's been cut, but not taken out of the ground. And this one weighs 1,650 tons. If someone was cutting these stones, it meant they wanted to use them, right? Why were they building walls with such huge stones? And how did they lift them? Because we can't lift them in the 21st century. Who were these people? Now, here's something very interesting that, again, you won't read in a lot of books, you won't know this, but there's a relationship, a geometrical relationship between, or directional relationship, geographical relationship between the Great Pyramid, Baalbek, and Stonehenge. And this is it. It's amazing. Watch this now. If you draw the diagonal across the Great Pyramid, like this, and this is connecting one edge to the other edge, the right direction points to Baalbek, directly to Baalbek. And the left one points directly to Stonehenge. Coincidence? So accurate? Well, interesting, right? Okay, let me now take you to Wales in Britain. Bryn Celyn Thi, this is how this is pronounced. This is supposed to be a burial chamber, though no one was ever buried there. Archaeologists call this a burial chamber. And some fascinating things happen over here. I don't have time to tell you all the stuff that happens here. It's magical. But I will tell you about one thing. So what happens is between October and April every year, the sun, this is oriented to the sun, the entrance. So the sun rises, and at sunrise, it shines through the passage and it lights up the stone pillar, which is inside the burial chamber. Now, by itself, it's not remarkable, right? Okay, big deal. The stone gets lit up when the sun rises. But when you consider this, that the sun shines in through this passage, but the stone pillar is not in line with this passage. It is off to the side, which means the sun is reflecting off the walls of the chamber and lighting up the stone. So that itself starts becoming an engineering problem, right? And here you can see the photograph I'm taking. You can see my flash is reflecting off the walls, because the walls, even now, 5,000 years later, this was built in 3000 BC, 5,000 years later, the walls are still polished. And it becomes even more interesting now. Can you see these marks on the stone, these notches or grooves? And here's a close-up. You can see these notches. This is one of the magic things of Stonehenge, of Bryn Celyn Thi. When the sun rises every day between October and April, every day it lights up a different notch. It climbs up the pillar. So in October, it's at the bottom of the pillar. It's right here. By April, it's reached the top of the pillar. This is a 5,000-year-old calendar, and this is advanced engineering, because the walls of Bryn Celyn Thi are basically stone parabolic mirrors to be able to reflect the light and make sure that it lights up just one notch every day and climbs the pillar. It takes advanced engineering. 5,000 years ago, advanced engineering, and there's so much more that happens over here, which I'd love to tell you about, but I don't have time. Now, about 20 odd years ago, I read, among a lot of books, I read a lot. I read these two books. And these books basically explored a lot of these mysteries. I've just given you a handful. There are hundreds of these monuments all over the world. And these two books basically tried to explain these using science. And their theory, I can summarize very quickly. The theory was that thousands of years ago, there was an ancient civilization spread out across the world. And these people built all these monuments because they had advanced science and technology. But where are these people now? It's not us. We don't have this technology. They were wiped out by a global flood 12,000 years ago. Now, the big question whenever you get a theory like this is, okay, so where's the scientific evidence? Like Robert Shaw came in and had scientific evidence to prove that the Sphinx was not built by Khafre in 2500 BC, but built much earlier. Where's the evidence for this particular theory? So I'm not going to present evidence or anything right now, but what I want to share with you are three scientific discoveries made in the last 15 to 20 years, which are amazing and mind-blowing. And I'm pretty sure you haven't heard of these. Let's start with the first one. We now know that in approximately 10,500 to 10,800 BC, around 12,000 years ago, a comet or an asteroid or a meteor hit the Earth. So let's assume it was a comet. We don't know what it was, but let's assume it was a comet. It broke up into fragments as it passed through the Earth's atmosphere, and these fragments struck the Earth's surface at these places. This event is now called the Younger Dryas event. That's what YD stands for, and YDB is the Younger Dryas boundary. And most of the places where it hit, strangely enough, were covered by an ice cap because the ice age had begun ending. 15,000 years ago, the ice age started ending, and 12,000 years ago, the ice was melting. But there was still a thick ice cap across North America, Greenland, most of Europe. And two things happened when the fragments hit the ice cap. One, a lot of the ice melted because there was heat, and sea levels rose by hundreds of feet, drowning out the coastal areas. So the map of the world today was largely shaped by this comet or meteor that hit the Earth. The second thing that happened was very interesting. There were so many explosions all over the world. The Earth really literally shook. There was dust and debris thrown up into the atmosphere, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and as a result, the sun was hidden for 1,300 years, causing an artificial winter. Today, it's called the impact winter because of the impact. And what's the scientific proof for this? Here we are. Now, this is, what geologists do. They go to Greenland and Antarctica, and in order to study what was happening in the Earth's climate and Earth's atmosphere thousands of years ago, they drill kilometers deep into the ice and take out ice samples, and they test those samples. So this is one of the test samples run on an ice sample from Greenland. And look at the red line, it's temperature. Minus 45 degrees centigrade for a very long time, till 15,000 years ago. This is the ice age. Global warming starts 15,000 years ago. You can see temperatures rise to minus 30. Ice age is ending, and then suddenly temperatures drop from minus 30 to minus 50. It suddenly becomes colder than the ice age. Now, this is not a natural phenomenon. This is when the comet hit the Earth and the sun was blotted out. And you can see for around 1,300 years, temperatures remained, it was colder than the ice age for those 1,300 years. When the dust in the atmosphere settled down, temperatures rose again and came to where they are today, which is about minus 30 degrees centigrade in Greenland. This is the scientific proof for the comet hitting the Earth. And this discovery also solved a mystery. All these animals you see on the screen, the large ones, the small one is us, Homo sapiens, it's us, human beings. But all these large animals mysteriously all went extinct at the same time 12,000 years ago. And for many years, scientists couldn't understand why. What killed these animals? Today we know these are tropical animals. They could not survive that 1,300 year winter. Human beings, we just about made it. Maybe our size, we were smaller than them. That's why we survived. So that was the first discovery. The second discovery is an archaeological discovery made in 1994 in Turkey, in a place called Göbekli Tepe. And here you can already start seeing these are stone circles, like Stonehenge. Only the difference over here is Stonehenge is just stones put into place. These stones are cut into T-shapes, all of them. All the stone circles have these T-shaped stones, very well cut. And also there are drawings and symbols carved on them. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but if you look at the center stone over here in the center of the screen where my cursor is, can you see this animal carved on it? If you look very closely, you may be able to see this animal. Unfortunately, I don't have a blow up of this, but there are hundreds of these stone circles piled up. Again, here, there's a stone over here in this part, the half broken stone. Again, there's an animal carved on it. There are these animals which never lived in this part of the world. Mysterious symbols which no one is able to understand today. And Göbekli Tepe, while being a very mysterious site, is also one that all archaeologists agree that this was built in approximately 9,500 BC to 10,000 BC, around 12,000 years ago. And this is surprising because we are traditionally taught that 10,000 years ago, we were hunter-gatherers. We would go out hunting for food and gathering fruits and berries and vegetables, wild stuff. We never had the technology or the science to be able to build stone circles like these, because these stone circles are all, like Stonehenge, astronomically aligned. You can track the movements of the Milky Way, of Cygnus, the constellation Orion. It's amazing how accurately these stones are aligned to all the stars. And so traditionally, our history textbooks tell us that human civilization started about 6,000 years ago with the Indus Valley civilization, Sumeria, Egypt. But today we know that with Göbekli Tepe, which everyone agrees, there's no dispute about it. Everyone agrees it's been scientifically dated back about 12,000 years ago. We now know that human civilization started with in around 10,000 BC, because hunter-gatherers could not have built this kind of a monument. We had to be more civilized. We had to have communities. And it's interesting because agriculture only started in 8,000 BC, 2,000 years after Göbekli Tepe was built. The third scientific discovery, made in 2009, these are archaeologists who were excavating a cave in Russia called Denisova, and they found a small finger bone, and they found this tooth. And this tooth is about 2.5 times the size of our teeth. So they thought this belongs to a large extinct animal, like one of the animals I showed you. They sent it for genetic testing. The DNA tests came back saying that this is a human tooth. The bone was a human bone. They both belong to a girl who lived around 40 to 50,000 years ago, probably died in this cave in Denisova. And she was human. She belonged to a human species which we had never seen before. Today, we know a little bit more about these people. They're called Denisovans, but we don't know a lot about them. What we do know is there are a lot of people alive in the world today who actually have Denisovan DNA. And small fragments of these people have been found. Now, this is a bit of speculation. I've been telling you facts so far. Now I'm going to speculate a little bit because it's fun to speculate sometimes, but this is not fact because no complete skeleton of Denisovans have been found. So we don't know what a Denisovan actually, looked like. But it is speculated that they could have been 9 to 11 feet high, tall. Their height, they're literally giants because based on the bones of their fingers, their toes, based on the teeth that have been found, it is assumed and speculated that they could have been very, very big people, at least 4 to 5 feet taller than us. But that's speculation. Let's get back to facts. This was a stone bracelet found along with that girl's bone. So one assumes that girl wore this at some point in time. And I want to show you this little hole at the side of the bracelet because this is the fascinating part of it. There's lots more fascinating, but this is really mind-blowing because the scientists who examined this hole to try and figure out how it was drilled into the stone by the Denisovans, we assume the Denisovans made it, their report says this. I'm going to quote from the report. It's not me talking, it's a scientist. They say that this hole could only have been made using a two-faced drill operating at very high speeds. A high-speed drill 40,000 years ago. Interesting. Did the Denisovans have some sort of knowledge which enabled them to have technology which was thousands of years ahead of its time? Well, it certainly seems like it. And this is what the scientists say. It's not me. This is fact. So while I was doing all this research, I also wanted to find out what was happening in ancient India. Was there science in ancient India? And I came across this amazing textbook on surgery written by India's first surgeon, Sushruta. It's called the Sushruta Samhita. And there's lots of very interesting things in this, but the one thing I want to point out to you is he talks about a method of plastic surgery which is still practiced in the 21st century. And it's acknowledged even in websites like Columbia University. This is the Columbia University website. Today, we call this technique forehead flap rhinoplasty. Sushruta was practicing it almost 3,000 years ago, 2,600 to 2,700 years ago. Sushruta was practicing plastic surgery in using exactly the same technique as forehead flap rhinoplasty. And this made it very interesting for me because I started trying to connect all of this, to the Mahabharata. And this is where I'm going to come back to the story that I started with. France, February 1868, Abel Barbin's body was found. A 29-year-old man who had died, who had committed suicide. But his mother, when he was born, held a baby girl. What happened? How did this happen? And there's a scientific explanation for this. This is 100% fact. If you Google Abel Barbin, you can read all about it. But let me very quickly tell you about the science without getting into the clinical or scientific details, because that can get a little boring. But basically, Abel Barbin was what is clinically called a male pseudo-hermaphrodite, which means he was born a girl and turned into a man at a certain age. May have turned at, maybe he was 15, anywhere between 15 years to 18 years of age, he would have become a man naturally. And is um, this is because this is a condition, like I told you, there was a genetic mutation which happened 7 months before he was born. And this genetic mutation led to the lack of an enzyme in his body called 5-alpha reductase. And it is the absence of this enzyme that causes this condition of male pseudo hermaphroditism. It is because 5-alpha reductase was not in his body that he turned into a man at 15 to 18 years. And this phenomenon of girls who become men naturally is quite well known in parts of the world. It's been documented, very, very well documented. And this is what happened. This is why his mother held a girl at his birth, but he died as a young man. Now, what is the connection with the Mahabharata? And some of you may have heard this story in the Mahabharata, which is very, very similar to the story of Abel Barbin. And that is the story of a daughter who's born to a king called Drupad. And that daughter's name is Shikandin. Drupad wanted a son. He wanted a prince, he wanted someone to succeed him as king. And he was distraught. So he prayed to Lord Shiva. And Lord Shiva, this is according to the Mahabharata. I'm telling you what happens, what the Mahabharata says. Lord Shiva appeared to King Drupad and told him, don't worry. She's a girl, but she will become a boy. Don't worry about it. You will have a son. The same daughter will become a son. And this is where the story comes in. The story of Shikandin is about how she actually gets married, right? And then her father-in-law, who's another king, discovers that she's a girl, and he accuses Drupad of treachery. He says, you lied to me. You have a daughter, and your daughter's married my daughter, but that's not right, right? And Shikandin, upset, wanders into a forest. She meets a yaksha called Stuna. And the yaksha hears her story and says, okay, I will lend you my gender. I will become female and you become male temporarily. It's a temporary arrangement. And you go back to the palace. When your father-in-law comes, show that you're a man. And then you come back to the forest and give me back my masculinity, and you take your femininity back. You become a girl again. And this is how Shikandin became Shikandi. Now, Stuna incurred the wrath of Kuber, who is the king of the Yakshas. And Kuber basically cursed Stuna, saying, you did something wrong. How dare you give away your masculinity to Shikandin? And because of that, you are going to stay female forever. You lost your masculinity, and Shikandin will stay a man forever. That is the story of Shikandi. So Shikandi became a man, and we all know that Shikandi, if this had not happened, the Mahabharata, the Kurukshetra war would not have been won by the Pandavas, because Shikandi was instrumental in the killing of Bhishma Pitama. Arjun killed him standing behind Shikandi, because Bhishma said, I will not fight a woman. And he said, Shikandi is actually a woman. And medically, could he have been right? Could this story have been explained by the science I actually told you about? Could that have been the truth about Shikandi? Because just think about this. Thousands of years ago, imagine the scandal. Today, we have societal problems, right? Imagine thousands of years ago, the scandal at a royal family. A princess suddenly becomes a prince. Was Shikandin a male pseudo-hermaphrodite? And she naturally turned into a man when she was 15 or 18 years old. And in order to cover up this, because people may not have understood it, in order to cover it up, They may have brought Lord Shiva into it, because if the moment you tell people, oh, Lord Shiva said this is going to happen, everyone says, ah, okay, it's divine, right? God said it would happen. Is it possible that this actually had a scientific explanation? So I just want to leave this thought with you, because it's a very interesting thing, some of the stories in the Mahabharata. And I asked all those questions in the beginning, and I explore a lot of these questions through the Mahabharata Quest series. Like I told you, the story is set in modern times, but I go back and look at scientific explanations and see if if there is some science that can explain what we read about. And the Patala Prophecy series is all about exploring some of the other. It's more fantasy. I explore things like mantras and how the Maharishis worked. But again, it's set in modern times. So I want to very quickly end with the Quest Club, and then we'll move into the question and answer session. So the Quest Club is a club for my readers. It's a free club. There are no charges for this. We have around 12,000 members of the Quest Club all over the world today. And basically, I post a lot of research that I do at the Quest Club. I post information about my books. I interact with my readers on the Quest Club. It's the best place to have an interaction with me. If you want to have a conversation with me, we keep posting comments and replying to each other. Hopefully at some point in time, I'll make it almost like Facebook, where we can have real-time interactions. But for now, it's you can ask questions, you can get responses, you can read more about research about it. If you found what I talked about today interesting, you'd love to join the Quest Club. It's very easy to join the Quest Club. I'll give you the link, the URL. You just go in there, create your username for yourself and a password, and it's free, and you become a member. So I just want to leave you with that thought. And I also want to tell you about a contest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 3 topics. You can choose any one of those topics. And you can either write something about those topics. You can write a story, an essay, an article, anything that you want. And these 3 topics are from today's session. I've given you some things, I've shared some secrets with you. You could draw something, you could write something. It's totally up to you. Choose one of these 3 topics and write or draw something about it and submit your entry. And you'll be told about how to do that. But I want to tell you what the 3 topics are. So you can either tackle the mysterious Denisovans, or you can use the mystery of Göbekli Tepe, the stone circles, the T-shaped stone circles, or you can use the topic of the secret of the Great Pyramid. Why was it built? Who built it? If you want to explore, I'm just throwing up ideas. You don't have to do it this way, but Denisovans, you could see what's there a connection between them and the Mahabharata. Göbekli Tepe, who built it? Why was it built so accurately? And of course, the Great Pyramid. What could its original purpose have been? So I leave it to you. You want to just write something, you want to write a story, essay, anything, or draw something, and submit it. And there are prizes. Again, you'll be told more about this in a bit. And this is the URL for the Quest Club, christophercdoyle.com/the-quest-club. So you can just log in and create a username, ID, and a password, and you become a member for free. So I'm going to stop now, and I'm going to take this off the screen, and I'm going to bring myself on the screen, and I'd love to answer some questions now.
Thank you so much, Christopher. That was fabulous. So much information in so little time. It's going to take a while to sink in, I think. So we have one question from Nidhi Joshi, who says, in which year did the Stone Age, we can officially say that the Stone Age got over?
So the Stone Age, there are a variety of, there's no fixed date for when the Stone Age got over and metals started coming in, but approximately in maybe around 1000 BC to 800 BC or so is when you have the Stone Age, the Neolithic period actually ending, the new Stone Age. The Paleolithic and the Mesolithic were much earlier, but approximately in that period you had the shift happening from stone to metal. So maybe around anywhere between 500 and 1000 BC, somewhere around that time. There's no accurate date for it, but that's the approximate range when it happened.
Okay, Nidhi. So that was your answer. And in the same vein, Nivanshi is asking, in which year did the Ice Age end?
So the Ice Age started ending in about 15,000 BC. It ended in approximately 12,000 BC or so, in approximately 10,000 BC or so. It was elongated a little bit by the Younger Dryas because the Ice Age was ending, and then suddenly there was this 1,300-year freeze again that happened. So approximately 10,000 BC or so is when the Ice Age really ended. So a lot of these monuments that I talked about, which were built around that time, were actually built after the Ice Age ended.
And it seems like it's a popular question because Ananya and somebody called Galaxy M21 has asked, what is the reason for the Great Pyramids being built? I mean, is there any conclusive evidence to say there's a particular theory? What would you say? Because you've done so much research on this.
So yeah, it's very difficult to say because I've just shared with you a couple of secrets of Great Pyramid. There are, if I could spend a week talking about all the stuff in the Great Pyramid. So just to give you an example, there's a particular resonance frequency of the King's Chamber. The entire Great Pyramid is built of limestone, except the Great Chamber, which is built of red granite. And granite has something called a piezoelectric effect. So there's a lot of and also it's the Great Pyramid, for example, the King's Chamber, only the King's Chamber is the granite chamber is suspended in the limestone. It doesn't touch the limestone. The walls of the Great King's Chamber do not touch the limestone walls that surround the King's Chamber. So there are lots of these little mysteries in the Great Pyramid. Lots of people have speculated. Some people say it was built as an astronomical observatory, but that doesn't make sense because the shafts that they say point to certain stars, some of those shafts are closed up. So how would you see the stars? They're aligned to certain stars, but how would you see it? Other people say that there's some radical theories which say that this was built as a power plant because, again, mysteriously, when the Queen's Chamber was first investigated in the late 19th century, in the 1850s and the 1860s, explorers found a 1.5-inch thick crust of salt on the walls of the Queen's Chamber. How did it reach there? No one knows. But this salt was, so some researchers have theorized, and these are engineers and scientists who come up with these hypotheses. Not nutcases who don't know what they're talking about. But so there's this theory that the Queen's Chamber, there was a reaction in the Queen's Chamber which deposited the salt, and through the tunnels, water flowed and other chemicals flowed, and there was energy that came out of the Great Pyramid as a result of this action. It's there's lots of these theories. It's very difficult to conclude what it was because it's a huge building. It's a 45-story, 50-story building. Why was it built with all these rooms, the chambers, and the passageways inside? It just doesn't make sense. There's another school of thought which says it was built for irrigation because actually there's a very interesting scientific principle which connects it to this. There are underground tunnels, mind you, under the Giza Plateau, which connect some of these monuments. And it is theorized that water from the Nile, when it flooded, it would flow into the Great Pyramid through one of these tunnels and out through the entrance and irrigate the land around. So there are lots of these theories. Some of them are fun to read. Some of them are really outlandish, but there's no conclusive theory that can explain as yet why the Great Pyramid was built.
I know. So Anandmay, that's so you heard what he had to say, but one thing I can say is that if you want a bit of the fiction and bit backed by fact, read his books because that's where you really immerse yourself. An hour is not enough to just listen to Christopher. Once you get into a book, and that's the beauty of a book as opposed to a session that you can go back to it again and again, reinterpret, read something else and come back to the book, isn't it? That's the beauty of reading. It's in your own private time and you can take your time to do research and come back to the book. So that's about the Sphinx. Now, the next question that's coming up is that do the Denisovans still exist?
Well, the Denisovans, it is believed by scientists that they died out approximately 30 to 40,000 years ago. And we don't know what drove them to extinction. So they don't exist anymore, at least not that we know of. No one's come across a fully grown Denisovan yet. So it's, the last, and this based on the fact that no remains of Denisovans have been found after approximately 30 to 40,000 years ago. That's when the youngest remains have been found. Now, that does not mean that that's a fact. That's our knowledge today. And this is very important to understand because, before 2009, we didn't even know that the Denisovans existed. So who knows? There may be discoveries that will come up later on, which will show us that maybe there are Denisovans and we are actually very closely related. Um, they're called a separate species, but one of the scientific definitions of a species is, and again, there's a lot of debate around this, even in scientific circles. But usually, the definition of a different species is when two species cannot have offspring that can further reproduce. So, for example, if you have a horse and a donkey, you have a mule, but a mule cannot reproduce further. That's what happens when you have interspecies, breeding that happens. But there has been evidence, there have been bones found of Denisovan human hybrids, which means, Denisovan and human parents. Uh, and the children were a mix of Denisovan and humans. That is why there are people alive today who have Denisovan DNA. They descended from that mix that's happened. So if it is possible for Denisovans and humans to have children, and those children can have further children, then these are not distinct species. The Denisovans are humans just like us. Very, very small changes. I mean, the size, the bones, etc., etc. But they are as human as we are. And apparently they had science and technology so many years ago. So I know I've digressed a little bit, but there's just so much fascinating stuff to talk about. I can't help it.
Yeah, and you have also triggered off imagination in all kinds of directions. So Alishba Asfa is asking, in the era of Egypt, which I think is the Sphinx time she's talking about, were dinosaurs still there?
Oh, that's a great question, because there are actually people who believe that the Sphinx was, if you look at the scientific evidence, and it was probably built around 9,000. There's one school of thought that says it was built in 10,500 BC, pretty close to where the comet was, and they've got a scientific reason for it, because in 10,500 BC, Leo, at sunrise, the Sphinx was facing Leo, and the Sphinx is a lion, so it was symbolic. So that's one school of thought which propagates that. But there are other people who have seen um, who've seen carvings in certain places which seem to show humans wrestling with large animals which look reptiles, which look like dinosaurs. So there is a school that believes that. But I think the overwhelming evidence is that the dinosaurs died out 66 million years ago, 65 million years ago, due to the asteroid impact and other things. And there were other things that were happening. The mammals were coming along. And there's another very interesting discovery made recently scientifically, which shows that insects may have brought about the downfall of the dinosaurs, and they were anyway on the way to extinction when the asteroid hit the Earth in 65 million years ago. So, short answer to your question, it is very unlikely there were dinosaurs when the Sphinx was built. They died out millions of years before that.
Similar to the reason behind why the Sphinx was built, somebody is asking, why was the Stonehenge built?
So there are again lots of theories about Stonehenge, and I've explored the Stonehenge and a lot of very fascinating Bryn Celthithi and other fascinating sites in Britain, and connected it to the Mahabharata. I've explored that in The Secret of the Druids, because the Druids were a very mysterious race of people. They were philosophers, medicine men, sorcerers. They were supposed to be able to do mind control, control minds of men. It is said that when two armies were on the battlefield, and if the Druids wanted to stop the war, the Druids never carried weapons. They just had the staff, if you've seen Lord of the Rings, Gandalf's staff, that kind of thing. And they would just walk between the two armies, and the men who were fighting would just put down their weapons as if they were spellbound. That's how it's been described by writers who were writing in 300 and 400 BC, Greek and Roman writers. Now, this is really interesting because the Druids have been associated with Stonehenge and Bryn Celthithi and a lot of these sites. Bryn Celthithi, in fact, is in Anglesey, which was the headquarters of the Druids, and and therefore there's speculation that some of these sites could have been places where the Druids practiced their rituals, because the Druids had, the Druids were actually called the Brahmins of the West. There's a very strong connection between them and the Mahabharata, which I've explored in The Secret of the Druids. And it is, they had astronomical knowledge. They used to pass down their knowledge from generation to generation, pretty much like in India, where, the Vedas and even the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and all the ancient texts were passed down orally before they were written down. The Druids never wrote down their knowledge. It was always passed down orally from one generation of Druids to another. So there's a speculation that, because we don't know, their knowledge was never written down. And because we don't know what knowledge they had, it is assumed that they may have had astronomical knowledge and other, knowledge. It is known that they had, medicinal knowledge of, herbal medicine, quite similar to Ayurveda. And therefore, it is assumed, there are some schools of thought that say that these were places where they practiced their rituals. There are other places, there are other scholars who have done research and said that Stonehenge is an observatory. It was built because it's a calendar. It can track the movement of the sun, the moon, Venus, some of the key stars in the sky, and mark the solstices and the equinoxes. And there are others who believe that Stonehenge was a monument for the dead. And another site very close to Stonehenge, a couple of miles away, called Durrington Walls. That was the place for the living. So the place of the living was Durrington Walls. The place of the dead was Stonehenge. People would come and stay at Durrington Walls and make a pilgrimage to Stonehenge. Though Stonehenge was never a burial ground. One skeleton was found outside Stonehenge, but nothing else was, and this poor guy had been killed by an arrow. Because I think they found an arrow embedded in his ribs or something. But there are different schools of thought, Druids, astronomy, burial, a kind of a memorial place. We don't know, because there are lots of these ancient graves around Stonehenge, lots of these barrows. So was it a sacred place where people came to worship? These are some of the theories that are around.
One thing that you have triggered off, Christopher, is that you have brought something like the Mahabharata and the science together, So I think that's going to stay in people's minds, because there is a question right here, which I think voices everyone else's question also, that these are two completely different views in people's minds. So is there a pinpoint reason? He's saying, is there a pinpoint reason to relate both of them? But I think what he's trying to say is when they go back from the session, suppose they have to say that science and mythology can actually match. So can you give them some clues so they can go and talk to their elders or their friends and say, listen, I think that's what this person is asking, This is Sudipta Mariala.
Okay, a fair question. So I would love to say I'm doing something unique, but it's, there's been a lot of research that's been done over the years on mythology and science. And I think I've done a lot of where I think maybe I've been in some ways a kind of a pioneer is in looking at the Mahabharata specifically, because I never found anyone who was trying to look at the Mahabharata and see if there was any way to connect science to it, using scientific facts, not just talking in the air. You can always connect anything to anything without proof. But I was trying to use our knowledge of science today and see, are there scientific facts today that can explain some of the things in the Mahabharata, like the example I gave you of Shikhandin and Shikhandi, and the other topics that I've explored in my books. But internationally, there's been a lot of research on trying to explain mythology using science, using astronomy, and other scientific facts. And typically, it's focused more on Western mythology, not so much on India and our mythology. But generally speaking, there's been a lot of academic research on this. And one of the books which I've read, I wouldn't recommend for you all to read it because it's a very heavy book. So maybe in a few years, when you'll have more interest in reading a book like that, It's called Hamlet's Mill, and it was written in the 1950s. And it's a very interesting study of how different mythologies across the world incorporate astronomy and astronomical knowledge into them. If you read the books that I talked about, Fingerprints of the Gods and Uriel's Machine, they're interesting books which also talk about how the ancients knew about about things like the precession of the earth and other astronomical knowledge, and all of this was incorporated into mythology. um, so there has been a fair amount of research on this, and a lot of researchers, serious scholars, have drawn conclusions that maybe a lot of mythology, some of the stories may be very fantastic, but they may have been, built over the years to make them interesting. But at the core of them, there could be real events that could have actually happened. And to give you an example, there is evidence that the Earth, parts of the Earth actually sank. So I'm not talking about Atlantis over here. I'm talking about land sinking and then rising again due to natural geographical forces. And one wonders the story of Lord Vishnu's avatar, the boar, Varaha. Could that have been created to explain this? How would you explain when land sinks and suddenly comes up again? And then you say, oh well, it's God who did this, and He came to save the earth in the form of an avatar. You look at the story of Noah's Ark. It is there in in there are 2,000 um, mythological tales across the world in different cultures. 2,000 stories, all saying the same thing, the same story of Noah and the Ark. And it makes you wonder, why were people all over the world saying exactly the same thing, that there was a global flood? And now you have the scientific evidence that yes, there was a global flood 12,000 years ago when the comet or the meteor hit the earth. So is it a memory of that event that's been incorporated into mythology? Because humans just about escaped that event because our homes would have been flooded. Lots of people would have died in that event because of the global flooding that happened. Because in thousands of years ago, people lived in the coastal areas. They lived along the sea, right? It was easier. You could fish. You had water, etc. So there you can actually link a lot of mythology to to actual science, and I've given you some scientific evidence which you can talk about. The Denisovans, there is one school of thought which is beginning to think that all the stories of giants, now we read about giants in all kinds of mythologies. If you go to British mythology, you have giants. You have India, you have giants. You go North America, you've got giants. All over the world, mythology talks about giants. Could could those be a reflection of the Denisovans? We don't know for sure. But there are so many facts that are emerging based on scientific fact that you can actually now start making these connections, and maybe not conclusive connections, which is why I write fiction, to try and explain this. But you can actually start wondering, could this actually be explained by scientific fact?
There are lots of questions out there. Thank you so much. I won't be able to take them, Subha. So I'm passing on the session on to Subha and Tasneem now. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Subha. Thank you, Purple Stone. Over to you.
So can I just take a second, please?
Yes, please.
For those of you who we haven't had time to take your questions, you have my email address. Please feel free to email me. Join the Quest Club. It's free. You can ask me as many questions as you want over there, and I promise you I answer every single one of every single question that comes to me. I respond to every comment that comes to me at the Quest Club. It's a very special club for me. So if don't worry if your question's not answered. You can always reach me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christopher. What an amazing session. I really loved it. We're joining the Quest Club, right away after the session. Yeah, Tasneem. And I'm sure, students, you must have enjoyed a lot. I have also learned and discovered so many things from Christopher, sir, and didn't know so many details about certain monuments which we generally know as tourist spots, but we don't know their significance or the history or mystery behind it. So thank you very much, Christopher, sir, for such an amazing session today where we learned so many things, and it has really sparked curiosity to read your books now. So I'm very shortly going to start buying your books, because I'm personally also interested in reading about history and science and the connection with mythology. What about you, students? I'm sure you are also interested, and now you will start going ahead and checking Christopher Sir's website and see where can you get his books. So
we literally discovered him today.
Yes, it's like we discovered Christopher Sir. So students, as Christopher Sir said, the contest is open till 5 o'clock today. Because Christopher Sir is in London, the results will be announced tomorrow. Okay, so
And the
go
books,
ahead and fill up that Google form and go ahead and complete the contest. Send your entries by 5 p.m. Indian Standard Time. Okay.
and for the books, you can go to eurekabookstore.com, please. And
Oh,
I've
sure.
given the link. Yeah, I've given the link.
Eureka
there.
Bookstore.
Thank you so much.
Swati
Yeah.
ma'am, can you post that link in the chat box so that?
Yeah, I have done that. I have done both the Quest Club and the Eureka Bookstore link over
Oh,
here.
great.
So there you go again. Huh? All right.
So that's
Okay.
thank you very much, students, for coming out on Sunday and participating in an amazing session. And I'm sure it was very, very worth your time. So we are signing off for today, and we'll see you tomorrow at 10:30 for our day 3 of the Literature Quest.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
And
Bye-bye, everybody. Before we go, a huge round of applause to Christopher Sir.
yeah.
And Swati ma'am.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for your time. You all have a great Sunday today. End the meeting. Stop.